Welcome to the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Thank you very much. Today's guest is Brad Taylor, a hero with a career in Special Forces, years of firsthand experience in high-stakes environments, and now a long run as one of the most trusted names in thriller writing. I am so looking forward to this interview with author Brad Taylor. Let me start with something a little provocative for all of you to kind of think about. I thought about this myself. At this stage in life, certainly in my life, none of us need cardboard heroes. We want characters who carry consequence. That's why Pike Logan works. He isn't polished, per se. He isn't tidy. He isn't the kind of hero who lets us sit back and feel comfortable. Pike Logan is wounded. He's disciplined. He's relentless. And sometimes unsettling. And that's precisely why he feels so true. Because by the time you've lived a little, and you all know this, the people who stand between order and chaos rarely come through untouched. Duty leaves a mark. Service leaves a mark. Loss leaves a mark. And Brad Taylor writes that truth with hard-earned authority is truth. Author Brad Taylor served in Special Forces before becoming one of America's most compelling thriller writers. And in his new book, Shadow Strike, he sends Pike into a global chase against an old enemy. You guys will know his name. He's the Ghost. With the action moving from Iguazu Falls to Buenos Aires and all the way to Ushuaia, the end of the world. But the real tension here isn't just the mission, it's the cost. What does a life of service do to a person? What gets protected and what gets lost? For our listeners, that's where this conversation gets very personal. This is about second acts. We're all embarking on them. This interview is about conscience. That's what Brad's life is certainly about. It's also about risk, that too, and the price of keeping others safe. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. You're listening on the Not Old Better Show to our interview with New York Times best-selling author, true hero, Brad Taylor. Best-selling New York Times author Brad Taylor is our guest today, author of Pike Logan. So many wonderful things. First of all, I'm the son of an Air Force guy, so we thank you for your service. Congratulations on all of your awesome work. And welcome, sir, to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be talking with you. You really bring a perspective that, very few other writers, can kind of offer. Of course, a career in Special Forces. You have years of firsthand high stakes, work in environments that are less than amenable. We'll put it that way. And now, as a longtime best-selling author of these wonderful books, I have your latest, Shadow Strike, here in my hands. Just fantastic. Thank you for sharing it with me. And I wonder if we could talk for just a second about your life in Special Forces and perhaps tell us, what was it that really allowed you to kind of blend the two, and as you found the strongest connection between the rigor and the precision that goes into being a Special Forces operator, and then bringing that together with the writing world. What really do you see as the connection there?
Well, I think the connection is more just imagination and wanting to write. But I mean, when you're in the commander in Special Forces, you kind of do this a lot that I didn't even realize it when I started writing, but I've kind of been doing it for a long time. So when you plan an exercise, wherever it is, it could be in a foreign country, it could be in the United States, it could be anywhere, but you're always creating somebody who's the enemy. And the teams that you're working with, they're going to do the mission like they're doing a real world mission. And you can't have them do the mission like a real world mission unless you control the left and right limits. For instance, if I'm operating, if we're doing an exercise in a real city somewhere, I'll have a place that they can hit because I've set it up and it got all the stuff inside of it, but to the right of it's a bank and to the left of it could be a doctor's office. I do not want them to hit one of those places. So then you've got to sit there and you got to say, okay, I got to give them the specific information that will make them go to this one target. There's 1,000 things they can do, but I need them to do one. And so you start writing in the scenario like that, and it's kind of like writing a novel because Pike Logan can do 1,000 things, and he's going to do one thing, but I need to have answered why did he not do 999 other ones? Otherwise, you'll get an email. Why didn't you just use the key in that lock? Why do you use explosive breach? Well, I'll write in there that he doesn't have the key, something like that. So you kind of do that as a commander anyway. When I was writing the books, I saw that and it was kind of like that's kind of surprising because if you write something in the book that and readers will find it and they'll say, I really loved your book, but why didn't he just do X instead of this long winding thing? Well, on a special forces exercise, if they do X instead of a long winding thing, it could be a live bank that gets hit. So you've got to figure out why you're not going to that area.
Well, you talk about kind of this idea of ripped from the pages and ripped from the headlines. Just a couple of days ago now, we had that F-15 Strike Eagle getting shot down over western Iraq, and special forces with CIA had to go in and rescue him. The extraction was performed under the darkness of night. I mean, you can't get better than that in terms of kind of possible stories. And I'm excited to see where you go with some of these things that are going on in the real world. But was there a moment during your special forces days when you just realized that storytelling was going to become more for you than just this kind of general interest?
No, not really. It's been that way since I was a child. I was always a voracious reader as a child. I was the guy that read underneath the covers with a flashlight, and parents said, "Go to bed."
Yeah.
And in the back of my head, I was just always said to myself, "I'm gonna, one day I'll write a book." It wasn't anything that I expected to make it as a career. I left a special mission unit at Fort Bragg because we were constantly deployed. I finished up command there, needed a break, and came down here to Charleston to teach at the Citadel, and which was very rewarding, but it was certainly a heck of a lot slower. And I mean, I would be like 9 a.m. What are we doing now? And once I built the classes and taught and all that kind of stuff, then it kind of it's kind of rinse and repeat. You build the class, but then you're teaching it same class all week long, 3 times a day. And I had a lot of time on my hands. So I started developing exercises for the cadets that we'd run downtown Charleston, finish that up. And then one day I said, my wife, I'm going to write a book. She said, whatever. And so I figured it would sit on my bedside table. My mom would say, "You're a really good writer."
Yeah.
And that's about the end of it. So I wrote the thing and it actually sold, which it created a huge junction in my life of what I was going to do. I'd come out on the promotion list to full colonel. My next assignment was 2 years unaccompanied doing counterterrorism stuff in Pakistan. My daughter was entering high school. And I couldn't publish the book if I was going to stay in the military because I was going back into a classified position. So I had to make a choice. What do you want to do here? And my wife kind of said, if you wanted to go back to Fort Bragg, you shouldn't have brought me to Charleston.
Yeah, right.
And so and she had grown up all over the place. Her dad was a colonel, and she went to 4 high schools in 4 years, and that would be my life too. And so I decided that I turned down the promotion, decided to give writing a try, and nobody's more surprised than me. If I'd have known how hard it is to get published, I would have never done it. But it certainly worked out. I'm incredibly lucky.
Well, congratulations, because hard work certainly has paid off. And the character is durable and just a joy really on the page. And your background, of course, just gives this tremendous credibility, and it just keeps us as readers just always coming back. I read about you that you operate as a writer with a no outline kind of approach. And I think that it surprised me, and I think that would surprise a lot of people in our audience, because the books are so tightly constructed, and all the motivations and certainly the plot lines, they just come together brilliantly. So when you sit down to begin work on a novel, what is it that you're looking for at the outset? Do you kind of plan to start in one place and then move multiple directions, just as you say, Pike Logan could go 999 different directions? Or do you have kind of an end few goals in mind?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I don't do an outline. I mean, I don't do an outline,
Mm-hmm.
but I do what I call a framework. In fact, when I wrote my second book, you've got your whole life to write your first book. Nobody cares. And the second book, my publisher, after he published the first one, said, "Okay, we need an outline for your next book, and here's your deadline, and here's what needs to happen." And I said, I don't know how to write an outline. I've got no idea. I don't know how that works. I said, but I'll give you what I call a framework. And generally what that is I know the threat. I know the setting, the part of the globe it'll be on. I know the bad guys, who they are, their motivations. And I would have said 100% of the time, I know how it ends. I know how it starts, know how it ends. But probably my seventh book, I changed the ending. So now I'd say it's probably 80% of the time I know how it ends. But I do know enough about it to get started. And what I'll do is I do a ton of research up front, reading on the threat vector and the problem set. And then I'll travel to wherever this place is going to be. For instance, Shadow Strike is in Argentina. We went all over Argentina, from the tri-border region, the Triple Frontier in the north, all the way to Ushuaia in the south, the end of the world, Buenos Aires in between. And I'm just doing research on the ground. And there's about 50% that I'm looking for. I mean, I'll have a checklist before I fly. Here's what I want to see, because I've already done the research on the country. But really, it's about 50% that's looking for me, and I have no idea what I'm going to find. And when I get on the ground there, it comes to me, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't even know this was here. Which is the reason I wish I could write with just Google Earth like a lot of people can. But I mean, the sight, sound, smells of the battlefield, the every culture is different, every city's different, every metro system's different. All that's different, and it takes me getting on the ground to figure out how it's going to work. And I mean, for this, like Shadow Strike, just to give you an idea where the ideas come from. So after October 7th, when Israel was attacked by Hamas, and we started looking, I still keep my fingers in the national security world, and everybody was looking at, okay, where's this threat going to go? If A goes to B and B goes to C, what is our threat? And one of the big threats was Hezbollah. Hezbollah was an unknown. Are they going to do? They have a worldwide reach. Are they going to strike out at the United States? They're going to stick with Israel, or is this going to be some kind of global phenomenon? And we started looking at it, and I didn't know this, but believe it or not, the largest concentration of Hezbollah outside of Lebanon is a Triple Frontier down in South America. They have more Lebanese in Brazil, for instance. If you count second generation, there's more Lebanese in Brazil than there are in Lebanon.
Wow.
And so that they had done an attack in 1994. The largest terrorist attack against the Israeli nation was down in Buenos Aires at the a Jewish center down there. Killed, I think, 84 people. For October 7th, that was the largest one they'd ever had. And Hezbollah had done that. They'd come out of the Triple Frontier and attacked. And so that sparked my interest, and I started doing the research, and that's what kind of generated the story right there. But you talk about ripped from the headlines. This thing ripped my book up from the headlines. So I had the whole thing just about done, and we conducted Midnight Hammer. And if we'd have waited until after I'd finished, I'd look like Nostradamus. So I had to rewrite the whole thing because it's all Iranian centric. It was based on their nuclear capabilities and all that kind of stuff. And I told my publisher was pulling her hair out, and my editor was, and I said, look, it's not that bad. This is all in Argentina. And the analogy I gave her was, this is like hunting Bigfoot. So if, say, I wrote a story about hunting Bigfoot because I didn't realize Bigfoot was fake. And I got to the very end of the book, and then I realized that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Well, all that hunt that I've written still works. I just need a different Bigfoot. And so that's kind of what I had to do after Midnight Hammer. And then we started this attack, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. But now it's actually the way the conflict's going, not to make light of it. It certainly plays into it. It's exactly what you could foresee happening.
Oh yeah. I felt as I was reading it. I mean, it is literally spot on. You really just do such a wonderful job. You do get this feeling of discovery as a reader about the characters, the locations, that you're seeing them anew, and you're writing about it in that way. I think that Google Earth might be adequate, but not in the same way that the discovery that we really feel, coming from you on those pages. And I want to talk about one of the characters, of course, the star of the show, perhaps, although there are several great ones, but Pike himself. As you write Pike, do you feel like his character gets shaped by the demands of the plot, or is it just your instinct of a man who is just extremely under pressure and yet has to be human at the same time? I love the added element of Amina in all of this too. She's a star.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Amina's a funny story too. So I give a 100% to each novel, and everything I can put into that book, I put in there, and I don't think about the future. I wish I could say that I'll do this in this book, and 5 books from now it'll come to fruition or something like that. For me, it's each individual book. And Amina, I wrote a book called Daughter of War, and she was a character in the very beginning that was going to get the plot going. That was it. She had a cell phone that Pike was going to find, which would then unravel this whole plot, which I won't get into. But she was going to exit chapter 4, stage left. I hadn't even decided, is she going to die? Is she just run away? It didn't really matter at the time. Well, by chapter 4, I liked her too much, and I didn't want to get rid of her.
Yeah.
And so she ended up taking over the whole book. As a matter of fact, that book's title was Shadow Strike. And by the end of it, I said that we're got to change the title, everything. It became Daughter of War because of her. Well, at the end of that book, I'm in the Pike Logan universe. She exists. It was perfect for that book, but then you write in the next book, she's there somewhere. Some reader's going to say, what the heck happened to Amina? And so I've got to figure out ways that, where is she now? She's growing up. So I put her in a boarding school and that kind of stuff. But she starts out at the beginning of this book. Because of that, she's Pike's using her on an exercise, which a lot of that's kind of some of the stuff we would do when you're working on a shoestring budget. But Pike himself that's the hardest part about writing a series is he's got to grow. I mean, in human condition, you're always growing. You go to college, you change. You get married, you change. You have children, you change. Your career, you change. And so Pike needs to do that too. He can't be the same character he was in book 1 that he is now in book 20. And that is some of the hardest things to get across.
Well, stay right here because Brad Taylor is just getting warmed up. We've talked about the craft, the discipline, and the scar tissue behind Pike Logan. But now we get to the part that really tightens the grip. Brad Taylor's new book, Shadow Strike, is the kind of novel that feels like a diplomatic cable with a lit fuse. Headline hot, fast on its feet, and carrying consequences in every single direction. Let's be honest, Pike Logan isn't wish fulfillment. He's what remains when wishful thinking runs out. He's action with a conscience, protection with a cost. The man sent in after polite language has missed its chance. From Iguazu Falls to Buenos Aires to the far edge of South America, this story moves like trouble with a passport. Don't go anywhere. The next part of this conversation hits like a door breach in a quiet room. Our guest today is best-selling New York Times author Brad Taylor. His new book is Shadow Strike. Brad, thank you for sharing a copy of it with me. I am a huge fan, and I loved this book. I will make sure to recommend it so highly to our audience, who I know is going to just love it with or without my recommendation, but it is fantastic. Congratulations on all of your work. I just thought this was just excellent. We talked for a minute here about Amina, and I want to talk about the ghost, because the ghost is somebody else who kind of appears elsewhere prior and now is jumping out a little bit again. He's escaped custody in the book. Certainly, I'm not going to divulge the other details about this, but it's an excellent element, and it really adds a great deal of tension for Pike personally.
Yeah, when he first came out, so he's from book 3, Enemy of Mine, and he was a really well-rounded. One of the things when I create a bad guy, the bad guy's never Dr. Evil. I mean, I've sat across and I've interrogated plenty of terrorists. And when you're interrogating him, you're kind of like, why does this guy want to kill everybody? I mean, he'll crack jokes, he'll be a nice guy. Well, he thinks he's a hero in his story. And I try to get that across on the page, that it's 3-dimensional characters. They have their motivations. We may not agree with their motivations. We may think their motivations are horrific, but they don't think that. And when I first created him way back when, he had a kind of a weird motivation. He was fighting for a Palestinian cause, but he wasn't fighting for Islam. He was a Palestinian refugee that was kind of mad about that. And so that was his motivation. And Pike captured him, locked him away. and he's been locked up ever since. Well, I had to have a guy who'd worked with Hezbollah. I was going to create a character out of whole cloth, guy who's worked with Hezbollah and everything else for this plot line. And I thought, well, you got the ghost. He's in jail. Now you just got to figure out a way to break him out that makes sense. And that kind of started that train of thought going, because he is a pretty complex character who ends up, I don't want to spoil anything, but he's got his own motivations and they aren't necessarily Iran's.
Right. You really get this sense of urgency too. And I think that's an interesting element that as you write, you really are creating a balance. We have to make our way through the plot, but it is driven and it moves very quickly. How do you balance that?
Yeah, that is very, very tough, especially the hardest part, like I was talking earlier about when you're doing exercises. When you're writing the book, the pace has got to continually amp up and amp up. But you're also dealing with the laws of physics. Certain things that can only happen at certain times. A plane can only fly so fast. A person can only run so far. So when you're pacing it out, it's really hard to maintain the pace going and still make cohesive logic as to why this is going on right now. And that is a ton of juggling to make sure. Like there's a hit in DC that goes on that Knuckles in charge of, which is going on at the same time the thing in Argentina. That was a nightmare trying to figure out. Luckily, Argentina and DC have the same time zone, so that was easy. But when you're talking about working in the Middle East, I wrote a book called Ring of Fire, which was the threat was the port systems. They were going to blow up all the ports around the world, and had these boats coming in. Well, it's a great plot. Sounds great. This is something super neat. But then when you're starting to write it, when the boat takes off, it's not a rocket coming in; it's going. So if you solve the plot, well, just go stop the boat. Don't let it get into port. That's an easy one to fix. And so that one caused me probably the worst as far as pacing goes. It's like that boat's not moving that fast. It takes 4 days to get across the ocean. Pike's got to be moving this whole time. As soon as he solves a problem, he just says, don't let that boat into port. But if it gets into port, then it blows up and Pike's failed. So this is very hard to keep the pace going where you've got a cohesive logic of why this had to happen at this time. Once again, someone can say, why did he wait so long for this? Well, there's got to be a reason he's waiting so long. How come it took Knuckles so long to find those guys in DC? Couldn't they do that immediately with the technology we have? So now you've got to create a reason of why. Why did it take so long? What did the adversary know to do to prevent them from finding him? That kind of stuff.
I always wonder when I read about Knuckles, he's a classic and he's just so wonderfully written. I wonder, have you met a Knuckles? Because I got to tell you, my brother-in-law is Marine Corps and he is straight arrow, sidewalls, short hair, ramrod straight. Knuckles kind of seems a bit like a biker dude, and so I wonder, have you met?
Yeah.
You come across a Knuckles?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
There's none of my characters are based on any specific individual. Well, there's one. Axe is a guy that he's actually a guy with a call sign Axe.
Yeah.
But the rest of them are just kind of composites, and I've certainly met them. Yeah, if you see them, there's plenty of people since I've retired. They've retired too, and now you look at them. In fact, one guy I saw last month, and I said, "Man, you look like Jesus. What's going on?" He's got long hair and beads and everything, but he's still the same killer he used to be.
I enjoyed my research of you outside of your authorship world, and you're so well known for your research in the authorship world.
Mhm.
But I found a list of books from Brad Taylor on your website, and I was really impressed at those titles. I had no doubts that I knew how well read you were, but some of the titles really surprised me a little bit because of their diversity there. And you have a book titled This Kind of War, and you've said about it that it's an especially meaningful book to you.
Yeah.
I wonder, what did that book teach you about the military, about culture, about leadership, and most importantly, I think this reality of conflict that we face?
Yeah, one of the main things, it's about the Korean War for people who are listening, and it's a really in-depth study of the Korean War, but it goes into much more detail into the Korean conflict as it represents America as a democracy. And a lot of the times I see on the news, are reporting that there's 1% of the military, 1% of the people serve. It's not like World War II where everybody served. Well, Korea was kind of like that, but it turns out that the military is much more intertwined with our society than people even understand. And Fehrenbach understood that the author did. And we were completely destroyed at the beginning of the Korean War. One defeat after another. We were running for our lives. And he has a pretty telling quote in there that this is a reflection of what the society wanted in their military, which was no training. It's all a beach now. World War II's over there. In his words, we told the military there was no more tigers, and then we sent the military out to fight those tigers with a stick. And I think that it's one of the best books I've read on the reflection of democracy, what it means to be in the military in a democracy, as opposed to, I guess, a dictatorship.
Are there other books, fiction or nonfiction, that have had a lasting effect on you and your sense of, kind of moral gray areas, including duty and power and loyalty?
Yeah, there's a book called The Dying Place. It's a fiction book, and it was written by a special forces guy, and I've met him since then. I read it when I was in college, and it really resonated with me. It's a Vietnam. He's a special forces team leader in Vietnam, and it really goes into the basic quagmire of what the moral complexity of what conflict is and what it means to actually go fight, not the rah-rah, let's just go shoot. And it's a really good book. It belongs in there in the pantheon of things we carried and things like that. But it really hadn't got its due. And so actually, All Necessary Force, the beginning of that is a Maxog team, my second book. And I contacted him out of the blue. He's a reporter now, or he's retired now, but he was a reporter in Virginia. And he was suspicious. Who are you? And I told him who I was. And so I sent him the book, and then we became friends. We email back and forth now.
Impressive world. I want to wrap up kind of this main group of questions with a question for you that I know my audience will be very interested in. So many of us in my generation, I'm 69, many of us are embarking on our second acts. Many of us are trying to write books and have admired so much of your work and what you've done. And I wonder if you give us some advice about getting started, because I think that's usually what hangs people up, sometimes about kind of this idea that you talk a little bit about, and that is trusting your voice. And then, of course, in your particular case, using some of these life experiences to really create this entire world.
Yeah, I'll say the two-part answer. Number one is going to sound trite, but it is absolutely true. I get emails all the time asking me about social media and how do I find an agent and how do I engage on TikTok or whatever. And my answer is always the same. Have you written a book? Because that's the first thing you need to do. And if you're writing a book, if you're setting out to write a book because you want to sell it, I'm not sure. I'm sure somebody succeeded at doing that, but I wouldn't have. If I would have thought that I was going to sell my book, I never would have started writing it, because I would have spent my entire time trying to say, what does that reader want? When I wrote my first book, I wrote what I would like to read. What kind of books do I like? That's what I'm going to write. And I wrote just because I wanted to write a book. So my first piece of advice would be just write the book. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter how, you can always go back and fix it. It's fiction. You can change anything. Even if it's just a couple of chapters or just write a couple of scenes. That's how I started, actually, was just writing a scene here. I had a bar scene. I wrote a bar scene. And as far as writing, the only reason that Pike became a counter-terrorist commando was because I didn't know how to write. I've had no instruction on writing. I don't have a degree in writing. I don't have anything. The only thing I've ever written was a master's thesis, nonfiction. I haven't written anything as far as fiction. And so I Googled, how do you become a writer? What do you need to do? And everybody said, write what you know. Well, my first book, One Rough Man, I wanted to write a story redemption. That's exactly what I wanted to write. But I was a counter-terrorist commando, so that's what Pike became. If I'd have been a police officer, Pike would have been a cop. If I'd have been a priest, Jennifer would have been a nun. They became counterterrorism because that's just happened to be who I was, but it didn't alter that I wanted to write a story of redemption. And I think anybody can do that with their own life experiences. And I'm not even saying you have to be ever written, and that guy didn't serve. So it's not something it's necessary. It just, you can always bring in your own life experiences of what you have gone through to enhance your book, especially at our age.
New York Times best-selling author Brad Taylor has been our guest. The new book is Shadow Strike, another Pike Logan series novel. Just wonderful. Brad Taylor absolutely crushes it, says Brad Thor. Another one of our favorites. We love Mark Graney here. All you guys are just doing fantastic work. Congratulations on everything, Brad, and my best to you. And really, especially on all this research, that's hard work, and it just pours itself out in the book. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'll just be selfish and say, please come back.
Will do. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
What a tremendous conversation with New York Times best-selling author Brad Taylor. He's written this fantastic new book, Shadow Strike. Brad Taylor does not write thrillers that sit politely on the shelf. Brad Taylor writes fiction that feels as if tomorrow morning's briefing slipped into tonight's reading chair, ripped from the headlines. Yes, but with more muscle, more heart, and a deeper bruise, perhaps. Brad Taylor's pages carry boot leather urgency, statecraft gone crooked, and the hard truth that keeping people safe is never clean, never easy, and never free. And Pike Logan is the perfect center of that storm. He is not a polished hero. He is a necessary one. He is action without vanity, protection without pretense, the last good lock on the door when the map starts shaking. That is what makes Brad Taylor's work land so hard with readers. Beneath the speed, beneath the danger, beneath the cinematic rush, there is always a reckoning. To hear this episode again, catch today's story, and listen to our full back catalog, visit notold-better.com. Find us on X at notoldbetter and Instagram at notoldbetter for a behind-the-scenes look at all of what we do. This is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. Thanks for listening. Be well. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast and on video. Please join me again next time on The Not Old Better Show.